welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this week. We are recording this on Friday, April 5th, 2024. It's around 2:30 in the afternoon. I tell you that, I don't know why, in case some kind of crazy news breaks. There's an earthquake in the middle of me recording this humble podcast. Both listeners will then listen back on it and remember what happened in that time. Of course, that's not going to happen, and I'm in a basement with no windows. I don't really know what's going on outside. I hear the weather's nice, and I look forward to enjoying it here in about an hour. Listeners, I hope you're well. I hope wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, your life is lovely and grand. I do know that Monday, just a few days from now, will be a complete solar eclipse. Some folks are losing their minds. Animals will be spooked. We'll see lots of photos on Instagram next week, I'm sure. I'm not planning to travel anywhere, but I applaud those who planned ahead, and you get to enjoy the path of totality, particularly down in McCurtain County. Maybe, just maybe, you'll get to see Bigfoot. Also on Monday is the American Heart Association's Capital Day here in Oklahoma. If you care about heart health, and you should, you've got a heart, you should come to the Capitol on Monday. It's from 9 to 3, I believe. It's all the usual things for a Capitol Day. If you've ever been before, this is a really good one. They're a big organization. They're super well organized. There's even lunch. It'll be really great. They are rallying in support of a particular bill, Senate Bill 1921, which would provide cardiac emergency response plans in Oklahoma schools. Right? This is if something happens, if a student or a faculty or staff go down, we want schools to have a plan in place, and that seems like a reasonable requirement. I believe the bill has a funding mechanism as well to help it show it's not an unfunded mandate. This is a win-win. It will be, it's passed the Senate and expected to go before the House Education Committee, I think earlier this week. And so it should be going to, I think it passed the committee earlier this week. So it should be going to the full House. And that's pretty exciting. Some other stats that I've looked up about this, about 23,000 children experience a cardiac arrest outside of a hospital. And since kids spend most of their time outside of the home in schools, it makes a lot of sense to have those cardiac emergency response plans in place. About 40% of those cardiac events are at like sports-related events. So whether that's in classroom, recess, or like a soccer game or whatever, super important, right, to have plans in place. If you've ever been around someone that had a cardiac event, you know it's terrifying. And the best response is one that is prepared in advance, right? If you've got to make it up on the spot, you're too late. Having response plans in place is paramount. And if you need another reason to come support this, New York Giants wide receiver Sterling Shepard and Buffalo Bills athletic trainer Denny Kellington will both be there for interviews afterwards. Sterling Shepard's got some experience with cardiac events himself. It'll be really exciting. I'll be there. Our fellow Ava will be there. It'd be great. That's Monday, this coming Monday, April 8th. All right. Well, aside from that event, we'll have a recap of some upcoming events at the end of the show. So please stick around for that and get your calendar handy. I'm telling you now. So go ahead and get your calendar out, get your phone, set it beside you, get a piece of paper to write down these dates. We'll come back to them at the end of the show. This week, friends, has been candidate filing here in Oklahoma. Filing for state legislature, for Congress, for county offices, anything that's going to be in the ballot. It's a candidate race this year, between now and November. You had to file this week. If you're listening to this, it's too late. This will publish after the filing deadline is passed, and you've missed out. You have to start thinking now, start planning now for 2 years from now, right? If you want to run, start planning now. We here in the Democracy Den have been tracking it. We've got big whiteboards set up with all the House and Senate and other races listed so we can kind of make sure that someone is filing for all of these seats. Not that we do any recruitment ourselves because we're nonpartisan, but it's good to keep tabs on what's happening at the legislature. And indeed, I can confirm that as of 2:45 p.m. on April 5th, someone has filed for every legislative seat. We'll have exact numbers next week after the deadlines pass, but I would say in round numbers, roughly a third of the legislature incumbents have not yet drawn any opponent, which means when filing ends at the end of today, they will, for all intents and purposes, have won re-election simply by paying a few $100 and putting their name down. That is wild to me. That is not exactly democracy at work. About another third of candidates have drawn an opponent from their own party only. So like Republicans only being primaried by other Republicans, and in some cases Democrats being challenged by another Democrat. There are a few libertarians and a few independents who have filed. But the problem with single party races is that while, yes, some voters will get to vote in the primary election in June, the rest of the voters in that district will not, right? Because we have closed primaries. So as I've discussed probably ad nauseum on the show, Republicans only allow Republicans to vote in their primaries. Democrats only allow Democrats and independents to vote in their primaries. Libertarians only allow libertarians to vote in their primaries, which I'm only aware of once that's happened in recent memory. And independent candidates are automatically on general election. There's no primary there. So if a third of candidates have no opponent and another third of candidates have only have an opponent from their own party, that leaves 1/3 that is truly a bi or tri-partisan or quad. I don't think there's any races in the legislature where there's an independent and a libertarian, and a Republican and Democrat. But maybe I'll be surprised. But only a third of those races will really be competitive and end up on the ballot in November. That's the other thing, right? No opponent done today. One opponent or opponents of the same party only, likely done in June, and then the remainder will go all the way to November. The problem with this, of course, is that most voters are only thinking about the November election. And if you don't vote in June, you miss out on a ton, right? And if you're registered of a different party, you miss out on a ton of races. Democracy, a representative democracy, which we have here in this republic, only works when people are allowed to cast their ballot, right? Otherwise, it's just a popularity contest among people who already think alike. And that is not exactly what America is made up of. Anyway, I'm not going to go on a longer rant about open primaries today, but it is something to think about. I think we'll have a lot more stats in coming days and weeks. I will also mention that there will be at least 2 statewide races on the ballot in November. The first, of course, is the president, so that's obviously one we all get to vote in, president and vice president. The second one is the Corporation Commission. And this is a underappreciated office in Oklahoma. There are 3 corporation commissioners who form the Corporation Commission. Those 3 commissioners are all elected to 6-year terms that are staggered, and they're elected statewide. One of those commissioners, Commissioner Bob Anthony, who I think has been on the Corporation Commission since statehood or something, a long time. He came with the building. He is not seeking re-election, and so that is an open seat, which almost never happens. And so as of right now, there are 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and 1 Libertarian who have filed for the Corporation Commission. So I think that and the president are the only statewide races. Certainly there's all the legislative ones and the congressional, right? The 5 congressional races. They are all currently held by Republicans: Kevin Hern, Josh Burkeen, Frank Lucas, Tom Cole, and Stephanie Bice. That's in order from the 1st to the 5th district. They have all drawn opponents. As of right now, they all have opponents of another party or more. Kevin Hern looks like 2 Democrats and 2 independents. Burkeen has an independent and a Democrat. Tom Cole has 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans and an independent. Stephanie Bice has one Democratic opponent, Madison Horn, who some of you may have remember her from previous cycles. And then Frank Lucas in the 3rd District, as of right now, only has 2 Republican challengers. So that would be an entire congressional race decided in the primary. That's wild. That's 700,000 people that are represented in that district, and only, roughly half of those would get a chance to vote in that in June. That's wild. Again, close primaries. Anti-democratic. Small d democratic. So we'll keep watching it. Maybe someone will file. Maybe that'll actually end up on the ballot. Who knows? There is a number of open seats in the legislature as well. Those, as expected, are pretty hotly contested and will be interesting to watch. Okay, well, let's talk about what's been happening in the legislature this week. I'm going to give a little news update sound effect. Oh, that's delightful. Hello, folks. Welcome to tonight's program. Democracy is being discussed. That's right. 2 of the bills that we've mentioned previously on this show, House Bill 1105 and Senate Bill 518, both deal with the initiative petition process, which is the first right guaranteed to citizens of the state by our state constitution. It is something that we should hold sacrosanct, dear to our hearts, and very, very special. We're one of about 24 states that have the initiative petition, and it is enshrined in our Constitution for a reason, right? The reason is the framers of our state knew that there would be times in history where the legislature was unwilling or unable to decide something that the people wanted. And in those cases, it is the right of the people to petition their government, right, to put it on the ballot ourselves, to say, we want this. We're going to rally together. We're going to organize. We're going to raise money. We're going to win this because we want it. And Oklahomans have used this throughout history, right? Both parties have used this with success. I don't know, great success, times of great success, sure. Way more losses than successes. It's extraordinarily difficult to get a measure on the ballot and to win. But in recent years, some notable occasions, right? Medical marijuana, criminal justice reform, Medicaid expansion. We've defeated some as voters, right? There was a corporate farming bill several years ago. There's been even a teacher pay raise and some other stuff that was pretty compelling that got defeated. And so I think this is something we should all pay attention to, right? Because this is the initiative petition process is a check and balance on politicians, right? It is what we, the voters, can use effectively to pass laws when we want them and the legislature is not truly representing the will of the people. Now, aside from the parts of it that are enshrined in the Constitution, there are a few things around the edges, processes that the legislature has instituted that they can still fiddle with statutorily, and almost every year they try to. And this year's no different. These 2 bills, House Bill 1105 and Senate Bill 518, both seek to tweak the initiative petition process in really bad ways, really cumbersome ways. The problem is that these bills don't agree either, right? One of them contains a filing fee of $750. The other contains a filing fee of $1,000. So if both of these bills were to be passed, they would have to figure this out somehow. I think it's whichever one passes later goes into effect. They also have different numbers when it comes to the contest period. One would expand the present challenge period from 10 days to 20 days. The other bill would expand it from 10 days to 90 days, which is way too long. So they haven't figured this stuff out. Senate Bill 518 passed the House committee earlier this week. House Bill 1105 passed the Senate committee, but they decided to strike the title because they recognize there's some stuff they've got to work out. I hope that maybe in the House, if Senate Bill 518 were to go to a vote of the floor, and I hope it doesn't. I hope they just decide this is not worth it. It's too messy. It's too ripe for, the potential for lawsuits, if nothing else. that they will strike the title or just not hear it. However, it's not on the calendar yet, but it doesn't hurt for you to contact your state legislators and tell them that you oppose these measures, right? That in both chambers, I think it would be eligible to go to the floor at any time. And so if you've got a few minutes to contact your legislators, now's a good time, right? Tell your House members that you oppose Senate Bill 518. Tell your Senate members that you oppose House Bill 1105. And use your agency, right? Like use your sense of concern for our democracy. Use your email, your telephone, make a call, make an email. Really, that's the very least. If you want to really go above and beyond, be an overachiever, come on Monday to the American Heart Association Capitol Day. There'll be other groups there as well. This is just one that I'm most familiar with. But come to the Capitol and go talk to your legislator in person. That would be really rad. That would be great. We'd love for you to do that. Aside from democracy issues, there's a bunch of other bills that are still in process. But I think the big news of the week really has been that the state or the Senate and the House are already like really bonking heads about the state budget. The Senate, as you probably remember, has from the beginning, even from last year, saying that they were going to have a more transparent budget process. And arguably that's been the case, right? They've had more meetings, more public meetings about the budget in committees as a whole body over the last a couple of months, which is much earlier than they usually talk about it. And in fact, the Senate passed a resolution that basically is like, here's our draft of the budget. And they sent it to the House. The House has not reciprocated at all. This week, there was some, consternation because the Senate sent something to the House the House sent something to the Senate, and it didn't contain any budget numbers. And so Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat has basically said, we're not going to pass any House bills until you send us a draft budget, this is the same kind of like gamesmanship that we've seen the last couple of years, where they really draw a line in the sand and say, absolutely not. We are not going to do this. No way, no how, unless you do that, right? Like they are legislating with ultimatums, which is different than maybe governing in good faith. But given the rhetoric and the discord between the chambers and the governor's office, this is just where we're at. And so we'll see. It is only the first week in April, right? They don't have to adjourn sine die until the last week in May. They've got a full 8 weeks to hold, back-to-back press conferences, to have little posters, to have whatever they want to do. At some point, the governor's office will chime in and try to strong-arm them both. We know like what'll happen at some point is they'll all get in a room and they'll start talking about some numbers, and there'll be some drafts kicked around, and then probably at the last minute, bloop, here comes the budget, and they got to vote on it the next day, and they'll adjourn sine die, and no one will really fully understand what's in the budget until they're already gone and out on the campaign trail. From a campaign perspective, that seems not ideal, right? To start campaigning when the public is still learning about the budget you just passed. I think because the budget has been so, it is what it is this year, right? There's some tax cuts. The grocery tax thing was a big deal. And then everything else, they're just saying like, just flat budget. Let's just move along. And if that's what ends up happening, then all of this is kind of like a lot of hullabaloo for nothing, right? Except I will add that a flat budget in the face of the high inflation we've seen over the last few years is an effective budget cut, right? If you still made the same salary you made 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it is harder to live, right? Harder to purchase the food and the bills and everything else you need to live. And that's kind of what happens with our legislature, right? They say, we don't want a big budget. We're going to keep it flat year after year after year. Well, prices go up, right? Teachers cost more, supplies cost more, medical care costs more. You can't expect to spend the same money year after year after year. It has to go up, right? revenue should increase, the raw amount of money. Now, proportionally, it can stay the same, but like the raw dollars has to stay the same. Anyway, I think it's too early to say, right? It's still the first week in April. There's a long way to go. The next deadline isn't until next week, and then we've really got some time. I feel like the fact that they're already at this like gamesmanship level in early April, this usually doesn't happen until the end of April. So maybe it means that they will come to some agreement and get out of session a little early this year. There's still a lot of bills they need to hear, both in committee and certainly on the floor. Some of those are going to be very contentious. And when there's an opportunity for you to use your voice, if we think it'll be helpful, I'll definitely alert you. If you haven't already signed up for our email list or you don't follow us on social media, you should definitely do it. That's the easiest way for us to get the word out. Usually my first go-to is Twitter because it's fast and easy. Second is Instagram because it's almost as fast and easy and it's more pretty and fun. And then usually if I have time, I'll write an email and try to get that out. But that's a good way to stay involved, especially around issues about democracy and voting and elections. If you care about a specific issue in some other realm, the budget, education, homelessness, housing protections, criminal justice, whatever it is, you should get connected with organizations that are tracking those issues specifically. To the extent that we coordinate our response, I think a lot of us have tried to cover a specific subject matter so that not everyone's trying to track everything. And that's pretty helpful. If you need to get connected with someone or you're not sure who to follow, reach out. I'm happy to steer you in the right direction or make sure you get connected. Apart from all of that, apart from what's happening at the state capitol, I want to take a minute to talk about outrage fatigue specifically. A while back, I did an episode, I guess it was last year, about existential exhaustion and just this feeling like just worn out, right? A feeling that I have, and I know that many of you do as well. That's probably been the episode that I had the most people reach out to me about. And so I think it definitely resonates. And over the last few months, I've been doing a lot of thinking about why people get involved, like why we do what we do. Let's Fix This honestly started out of some sense of outrage, right? In 2016 with this budget crisis, it was preventing some of my patients with HIV from getting life-sustaining medications they needed, and that made me really angry. And I feel like that was a righteous anger, right? Same with concern over our State Department of Education and the rhetoric coming out of that building and the responses to the death of Nex Benedict and her bizarre and outrageous allegations of, woke agenda stuff and all these culture war things. Like, there's a lot to be outraged about, and I'm not here to say that you shouldn't be outraged. You absolutely should, right? We all should. Some of the stuff is ridiculous at best and incredibly hurtful or dangerous at worst. And we should be outraged, right? We should be outraged when there is a loss of respect for the rule of law, when there is a disregard for social norms, when there is a willingness to target individuals about anything, right? Especially those that are already in marginalized communities. We should be outraged when our state refuses to meet the basic needs of basic funding needs of public education, or when we are allowing people to fall through the cracks, when we treat people like less than the humans they are. all of that's outrageable, right? Like that is righteous anger is the correct response. But damn, it's exhausting sometimes too, right? Like it is exhausting to feel like you have to give 100%, that you have to like give a shit about everything. And that if you don't, that you are somehow less than, right? That you're like, if you're not doing absolutely everything you can, that you are inadequate and that you're failing the whole system and failing everybody else, failing society. That's not okay either. And it is unhealthy, and if not impossible, to maintain a sense of outrage perpetually, right? Like you can't be outraged all the time forever. You will eat yourself up. Like your body will eat itself up. You will have, heartburn, aches and pains. Like your body will physically break down, and like emotionally, mentally, it's not healthy either, right? And I know a lot of folks who have been low-key to high-key outraged, since the 2016 election cycle. And here we are 8 years later, right? And if that's you, if you've been like simmering for 8 years, I want to hug you and say like it's okay to take a beat and rest a little bit. You don't have to give up, but like it's okay to let it go. It really can be fatiguing, right? Like our bodies are not designed for that kind of hypervigilance for that duration. And, there's a lot of talk about compassion fatigue, right? Among like caregivers. So if you are someone who's a social worker, healthcare worker, teacher, anything, right? Like, and your job is to care for others, it can be exhausting as well, right? Like there can be that emotional exhaustion as well. And there's lots in the literature about that. You might have anxiety or other, emotional symptoms about that. It's hard to worry about people. Can feel overwhelming, I think. And we see this around, think about the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Which was, absolutely life-changing for so many of us, in bad ways and good. And there were parts of it where we had immense compassion for others. I think of our first-line workers and our teachers trying to make education systems work, right? And, my friends who work in healthcare seeing so many patients die, and how many healthy patients, right? The unexpected young people get sick and die or become disabled. And that is exhausting on its own. At the same time, right, it was hard not to also feel outrage at some of the policies and some of the behaviors of just others, right, of society. It was really weird, I think, to hold space in yourself, to have compassion for humanity and be outraged at humanity at the same time, right? And that is like, gosh, I hadn't even thought about it that way, but it's such an overwhelming feeling of trying to feel so open and compassionate and also being stabbed in your heart at the same time and being like overwhelmed with outrage. And I think that was I would say normal because we all went through it. It was a very human experience, but that is not natural in the course of humanity, right? Like those kinds of experiences are overwhelming. War, right? Overwhelming in all kinds of ways. Compassion for your, maybe for the cause, right? Even soldiers and fighting a clear enemy of like the Nazis, right? And feeling like they were definitely on the right side of history and doing the right thing. But seeing that much death and destruction and is also like just overwhelming and certainly would cause outrage and terror and everything else, right? And at some point your body just says enough, says stop. And it is, or then how we deal with it is the next thing, right? Well, so outrage fatigue is the same thing as compassion fatigue, but obviously about outrage, right? Maybe, long-term like cynicism or even apathy, maybe hopelessness, like in response to, like, those are the fatigue symptoms, right? Like when you've been outraged for so long, at some point you kind of give up, you check out, you say, never mind, you throw your hands up, you say, fuck the other guys. Like you write them off. And to me, when I feel outrage fatigue, I lose my ability to be compassionate and empathetic as well. And that hurts me. Like, that's scary to me too. When I get so mad that I stop caring, something's gone too far. Like, I can feel it. I'm like, okay, I've gone to the dark side. I need to pull back. And I think in today's world with social media and being connected all the time and trying to take on so many social, political, legal, economic causes, right? It's hard to like hold space for all that. Like, how do you watch the news about police violence towards, Black Americans, or bad government decisions, or, the war in Ukraine, or the war in Gaza? Just, Imam Inchazi here in Oklahoma City has lost, I think, nearly a dozen family members, right? I don't know how he goes on like that. He's stuck over here in the U.S. while this battle rages on, and he's trying to care for people here in this country, some of whom have lost loved ones, and to live in this state that is not always inviting to him, where he has been called a terrorist. Like, there's just so many conflicting, compounding things happening in our world that it's really hard to keep going. And at some point, you might check out. You might give up. There's also a part where you just kind of reach like the ceiling, right? They call this the ceiling effect, where you've kind of maxed out your outrage at one issue, and then another one comes along, and you're like, I'm already outraged at a 10. How do I also outrage appropriately to this other issue? Like, I can't. These things don't go to 11. I can't crank them up. And trying to figure that out just feels impossible. And then when you can't, right? Like when you feel like the thing you're supposed to do is just be outraged, and you can't anymore, then maybe you yourself feel like a failure. Maybe others make you feel like a failure for that. You feel like you're supposed to care about this. And I think this is tough, right? I think this is where the constant stream of news and information gets to be too much. And maybe as humans, we've gone too far in this way, that we were not designed to process and to hold space for this many things at once. Like, I sat in a meeting a few hours ago with some colleagues where we went around the table about our different policy areas and give updates about the legislature. And there were a lot of victories that were really great to hear about. And then there was a lot of bad bills still out there. And each one of those was like, golly, if this passes, not only does it hurt this organization, but it hurts thousands of people. And it, in some cases, does something that is just unnecessary. Maybe it's misguided or whatever. And it was, at the end, I was taking notes, and I was just like, well, we all feel exhausted now. We have outrage fatigue, even from this one meeting. So if this is you, I guess this is a long way to say, if you feel like you are bumping up against or well into outrage fatigue, and it is impairing your life in any way, right? If your give a shit has given up, it's time to listen to your body and maybe take check of where you're at, make a few changes to kind of realign things, because I don't want you to give up, right? Life is hard. This state is hard to live in sometimes. But Oklahoma is worth the work, and we need you. I need you to be involved in whatever capacity you can when you're able to. And we also need you to take care of yourself so that you can do that, right? And this means that we have to, I think, and I will admit, this is something I am working on right now, is figuring out what is the right balance of input and output in your life, right? How much news and information can you input, and how much outrage comes out, and how much like work comes out. And if all we're doing is consuming news and then regurgitating into social media, or worse, into our interpersonal relationships, just spewing outrage back at the world, that might be a temporary relief for you, right? But the problem is you're still probably consuming too much, right? And you might need to look at finding a way to change your input so you can change your output, right? For me, like a good first step was to sit down and think about what are the issues that I care most about, and make a list of all the issues you care about, right? And then rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are the big things, like the big ticket items? What are the big chunks that are like the most important? If it's healthcare, racism, equality, education, corruption, whatever, right? And this can change throughout your life, right? As I've talked about this a little bit, but my youngest daughter has some developmental disabilities. We've learned recently some of her, some genetic testing. We have an idea of what's going on with her now. And so that's giving me something else, right? That was not on my priority list before her, but now it is, right? Which means I have to make room. Some other things have to give way because she's my daughter, it's my family. And this is a more personal thing for me now than it used to be. And so that issue, like disability rights and access to care and all the issues that go along with that, was always something I cared about, but now it's like way near the top, right? And that is a big shift and a shuffle with other things. You may have guessed, like for me, democracy, elections, representation, those structural things, that's a big deal with me. That's like up there. That's like number 1 or 2, right? Up there with disability and healthcare. And those are probably my big things. That doesn't mean I don't care about other things, right? Criminal justice, housing and homelessness. Like these are all things I care about. I care about people deeply. But if I'm going to rank them, there's some that are at the top and there's some that are in the middle and maybe some that are lower down, right? I don't give a shit about tax cuts. Like that's lower. Like that's me, right? And so, but everyone's different. As I'm just saying, a little transparency in where I'm at. So now that you recognize that you cannot be super outraged about everything. You cannot care an equal amount about everything. Like you will physically give out. So rank them by how much you care about them, and then go back and then make another column and rank those by how much time maybe you spend a day thinking or worrying about that issue, right? And for me, this was helpful, right? Because I think about and worry about my daughter a lot. That's part of why it's so high. Like it's my daughter. It's obviously a big deal. I think about democracy a lot more than the average person. I'll be honest. It's my job. That's part of it. But like the reason it's my job is because I was thinking about it a lot. When I worked in healthcare, I was like, oh man, this democracy thing, if we can fix that, we might be able to fix some of the problems in healthcare too. So for me, that's where I go to. There's other stuff that I don't think about as much. And sometimes I feel bad about it. But like I got one brain and only 24 hours a day. And I got to eat, sleep, drive, do those other things too. So rank how much time you're spending thinking and worrying about that stuff. Now go through the list again. And another way, and this one's hard, is to like rank them by how much you think your contribution could make a difference. Now, and maybe another way to approach it is like, how much does what you're doing about it, if anything, making a difference, right? You can sit at home and think and worry about an issue all day long. But if that's the only thing you do about it, then you haven't done anything to change it. And that alone can be really frustrating and stressful, right? There are things you can do about a great many issues. You might not be able to do the one thing you want to have happen. And in some cases, you have to let go of that, right? I will, as one example, in Oklahoma, there are a lot of people, based on the polling we've seen in the last couple of weeks, there are a great many people who are really frustrated, if not outright pissed, at State Superintendent Ryan Walters, right? Maybe disappointed, maybe angry, whatever. There's a lot of negative sentiment about him. And if the one thing you want to have happen is for him not to be in office, I'm sorry, but there's nothing that like you as an individual can do, right? The legislature could take action. They haven't. I don't think they will. But he's on, and Walters isn't on the ballot until 26. So like right now, today, sucks, but like there's nothing that you or I can do about it. And so you can either sit at home and be frustrated by the lack of ability to do anything and being hamstrung on that, or you could find something to be involved. Either a way, like you could send your legislator an email and say, listen, I really want this to happen. Like I'm really looking, is there anything you can do to like impeach him or remove him from office or something, right? Like you can do that. Will that actually make a difference? Hard to say, right? Probably not. But what about how you can help support the education community in your neck of the woods, right? Do you volunteer with your school's PTA? Do you hold community meetings with your neighbors to talk about how to support your local school? Do you work with education advocacy groups like the like PLAC, right? The Parent Legislative Advocacy Committee. They've been on the show before. Like, do you get involved with them who are working to change education policy, who have deep relationships with the legislature to make positive change? Like those are steps you could do that would be a positive outlet, right? Now, once you've kind of ranked all that stuff, like you ranked your priorities according to what you care about, how much time you give to them, what you're actually doing about them. Now look back at that sheet and be like, okay, what does this tell me? Are there, one or two or three things that kind of rise to the top that say, these are the ones that I should spend most of my time here because I care about them and I can make a difference. And then allocate your time and your resources accordingly, right? You've got to, I think, the key thing, right, is to like follow your values. What are the things you care about most? And let's say you can, think of it this way. Like if you've got 100 points of resources, time, energy, emotion, and you're going to allocate those 100 points out to these issues, how do you give them out, right? And like apply a number. Do you give 50 to this one and maybe 25 to another one and then 10 and 10 and 5? Do you give 100% all to one issue? I admire people who do that. I can't do it. I'm not that solely focused. Do you do 50-50 between two issues? Whatever it is, right? For you, what's the right mix? I would encourage you to think about in terms of time, like this is not all of your time. You've got to have time for yourself, for sleeping and healthcare and eating and like family and friends and doing stuff, right? But if you're just looking at your time you devote to these kinds of issues, there's a healthy way to do it. And what I found is that the more structured I am in taking this approach, the more free I feel to like do a good job. It allows me to free up some of my spirit, some of my emotion, and some of my anxiety that I might give to like other issues of thinking like, oh, I need to do that. Oh, I ought to do that. I should go on social media and like share these other events. I should go to these things. You just can't do it all, right? And it's okay to say like, I'm really focused on these 3 things right now. It's not forever, right? But like, if you want to focus on a few things, that's totally okay and good. If you aren't sure where to start, right? Like you're looking at issues, you're like, okay, these are problems that I see. These are things I'm outraged about or I worry about, and I'm not sure what to do about it. I'm looking for a way to get involved. I think one of the things that we are trying to do here at Let's Fix This is to create more opportunities for people like you to be involved in civics in a positive way, right? There's a lot in politics and civics that is negative right now, right? Everyone has used outrage as a organizing tool, and we are exhausted with it. And I am trying to find ways to use hope as an organizing tool. And it's hard. It's harder because we are wired as humans to give more attention to negative news than we are to positive news. But man, a positive interaction with a person is just so effing good, right? Like a good conversation with a stranger where you listen to them and they listen to you a little bit and you walk away and you know that you made that person feel heard is so rewarding. And so one of the big shifts that we're making over the next few months is creating opportunities for you to interact with other people in ways that are positive, right? So by going to, this will involve phone and text banking, right? Inviting people to come to events and then going to public events, like we're working on kind of building out a tour of the state where we're going to go around. We've got a bunch of partner organizations and we're going to kind of buddy up and do like little town hall meetings in a whole bunch of places. Like we've got a list of about 20 priority towns that are outside the metro areas and including the metro areas, of course, but like going all over the state just to talk to people. And maybe you don't want to go drive to a rural area. Maybe you don't have time or capacity, and that's fine. Maybe you would be willing to invite your neighbors on either side of you or across the street over to your backyard for a cookout. Or invite some of your friends. They don't have to live next to you. I just used that as an example, but maybe invite, 4 people over to your house and do a little cookout. And for the purpose of like talking about, to hang out, the purpose of hanging out. And in that hanging out, we talk about voting and like not necessarily trying to strong arm them into voting, but talk about why it's important and talk about maybe they want to help you do voter registration. Maybe you want to knock doors in your own neighborhood and meet some of your neighbors and just ask them if they're registered to vote. And if so, remind them about voting and why it's important. And if they're not, help them register. This is all nonpartisan activities. It's not about a candidate. It's not even about an issue, really, right? Just talking about being involved makes a big difference. And listening, right? There's the old adage that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should listen twice as much as we talk. And I know you've been listening to me for like 48 minutes talk, so bless you for that. But there's an opportunity. I would love to listen to you talk for 48 minutes. If you want to call me on the phone, I'm happy to do that. But I think that we collectively, right? If everyone who listens to this podcast made an effort to talk to just 10 people this year about voting and get them to vote, surely 10 people you could encourage to vote, people you think kind of on the bubble, not your friends who are likely voters all the time, but just like bringing it up and talking about why it matters to you and why voting is important. We can have a tremendous impact on the future of our state, right? Because when people tune in, when they get involved, when they go to town hall meetings, when they go to candidate forums and get to know these people, you realize a couple of things real quick. 1, these candidates are just regular folks like you and me. 2, they don't know everything. We assume that they know all this stuff. They're experts. They're not, right? 3, they're super accessible. They're right there in front of you. You can talk to them. And the fact that you showed up and talked to them means way more than everyone else who didn't. And you already have an in with, a potential elected official. 4, you have a relationship with them. And that relationship comes with some degree of influence, right? You follow up with an email, you go to another event, they recognize you, suddenly they feel more accountable to the voters because people are paying attention, right? If you're a candidate and you hold a couple of town halls and no one comes, you figure that people just don't care. You hold a couple of town halls and people show up and people are tuned in, you recognize, oh, this job is important. I represent people who care. My district cares about what's going on. They're going to turn up. I better show up as well. That's a big deal, right? The way that we hold elected officials accountable is by participating in the system It means voting, even when your candidate's going to lose, right? But by casting a vote is your way of saying, I am participating in this system, and I know I'm not going to win every time, but I'm going to show up, right? Teams rarely go undefeated, right? Individuals rarely excel their entire lives. Everyone faces adversity. Everyone's going to lose. As voters, we're going to lose. But by golly, when we show up again and again and again, then overall, we, the people, win. We can do it. So, in summary, if you're feeling outraged about everything, take a breath, right? Make a list, prioritize, allocate your time and your resources where you can. Find ways to allocate them so you can make a difference, right? And sitting at home being frustrated is not making a difference for anybody. Certainly not for you. If you're not sure where to start, holler at me, right? Send us an email, get connected. We are having some volunteer orientation, onboarding, right? You may have seen our posts about this, but next Tuesday, April 9th, and the following Tuesday, April 16th, we have 2 times each day. I'm going to be on Zoom a lot, right? So next week on April 9th, we have one at noon and one at 7 p.m. And then on the 16th, we have one at 3 p.m. and one at 7 p.m. And our goal here is to get volunteers just to show up and say, hey, I am interested. I'm thinking about doing something. I've got to do something more than nothing. I don't know what it is. But if you've got opportunities, I'm on board. We will talk about phone and text banking. We will talk about knocking doors. We will talk about writing letters to the editor. We will talk about CivicsCon. We will talk about house parties. We'll talk about town halls. There are lots of ways for us to get involved. If you want to do something else, right? Maybe you're really into electronic dance music and you want to host a rave for democracy. Spoiler, I'm into electronic dance music and I would love that. I don't know that it's going to move the needle, but it sounds like a lot of fucking fun. So let's do it. Maybe you have a farmer's market near you and you want to do voter registration at that farmer's market every Saturday. Yes. I want to enable you to do that. I will give you the forms and I will train you. We will try to rally some volunteers. We will help provide the infrastructure, but I can't be at every farmer's market. Ava can't be there. Our other volunteers can't be everywhere at once. We need more people. That's the simple truth. We just all need more volunteers. We need more people. And together we can 100% build towards a better future. So if you've got an idea and you think it's crazy, I definitely want to hear it. If you've got an idea you think is kind of tame, I want to hear that one too. We want you to be involved. And more importantly, there will be other people on the calls who are interested in your crazy or tame idea, right? No matter how silly the idea that I've come up with in the last 8 years, or one of my board members or one of our volunteers, we've almost always said yes to things and people always show up. Sometimes it's 3 people, sometimes it's 300 people. You don't know, right? Until you try. And there's no harm in trying. It's honestly super fun. And it is immensely rewarding. And for every new person we register to vote, for every occasional voter that we get a little more dialed in, we move a little bit closer to a free and fair, truly representative democracy. A future where we don't have half the board full of incumbents who aren't even challenged, right? We get closer to a participatory form of government that we really envision. Okay. I'm going to wrap up real quick with a couple of reminders. 1, you are awesome. Remember that you are awesome. The fact that you listen to this podcast about Oklahoma politics and news is extraordinary. It is mind-blowing to me. Probably your friends and family think you're crazy. But the fact that you were tuned in enough to listen to this says a lot about you and your character. And I thank you. Reminder number 2, this Monday, April 9th, is the American Heart Association Capitol Day. It's on the first floor at 9 o'clock. Please come. If you can't make it on Monday, The following week, April 16th, is the Tulsa Young Professionals Day of Action at the Capitol. On April 20th, which is a Saturday, from 11 to 4 p.m., if you're in Oklahoma City or want to come to Oklahoma City, it is Earth Fest, right? Earth Day is on the 22nd. So they're having Earth Fest on that Saturday, the 20th. It's at Scissortail Park from 11 to 4 p.m. It's super fun. We'll be there. We're going to be doing voter registration. We also have, they've got some live music there. They've got some conversation about compost. They have a few classes. One of them is called Being a Community Advocate. And guess who's going to be there? That's right, me. Also, Oklahoma City Council member Jo Beth Hammond. And it'll be facilitated by Kara Joy McKee, who some of you might remember from previous advocacy work, but she is now the director of the Sierra Club of Oklahoma. So she'll be there. Also a conversation about climate change, Oklahoma native plants, and lowering your waste footprint. I don't know if you care about climate and earth. It's super crunchy and should be a lot of fun. You should come on April 20th to Scissortail Park. Later in the month, April 25th, Together Oklahoma will have a day of action at the Capitol. And then next month, on May 13th, is Muslim Day at the Capitol. There's a lot more. I'm running out of time. Just trust me, there's a lot going on. There are lots of times for you to get involved. And one last plug, right? Tuesday the 9th at noon or 7, Tuesday the 16th at 3 or 7, Zoom. You can find out how to join that by going to our website, letsfixthis.org/volunteer. All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for being you. Thanks for caring. Remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.